Chapter 12 of Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth is rather odd. For some reason, Paul decides to write about a man in Christ going to third heaven, a thorn in the flesh, bragging about weakness, and having power in weakness. Let's take a brief glance at some theories about this text. Many scholars suggest that the man in the vision is really Paul, speaking in a third person to diminish himself. However, Michael Golder dismantles the arguments for the man being Paul pretty thoroughly. For the thorn, some scholars suggest that it is a literal angel or messenger of Satan, while others say it's representative of illness that Paul has. Overall, Sandra Hack-Pulaski suggests that this is a story of trauma and healing, while Hans-Dieter Betz suggests that this is a parody of a Hellenistic oracle vision. And David Litwa takes this parody notion and builds on it, and suggests that it is instead a parody of an extra-biblical account of Moses traveling into the heavens. I think Paul is doing something else, something ancient. I think he is using parody, but really he's using mockery to mock the super apostles. Now, the super apostles, we got to take a step back. Corinth in the first century was a major city of the Roman Empire. Towards the middle of the century, Paul traveled there and is believed to have founded the church in Corinth. He stuck around for a while and then he moved on. After a while, some super apostles showed up and started preaching a different gospel. They are also putting down Paul's abilities and boasting about their own. Now, a word about boasting. According to Rudolf Bultmann, Paul uses the word reread as boasting or bragging to mean those seeking self-glory before God. He also tells us that in the Hebrew Scriptures, seeking self-glory is the chief activity of a foolish and unrighteous man. So Paul writes in this letter what we now call the fool's speech, in which Paul boasts of his own foolishness and says he will boast of things which show his weakness. Now, here's the interesting bit to me. Chapter 12. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know or apart from the body I do not know, was seized to third heaven. 14 years is a rather long time ago, and that repetition of I do not know is quite striking. Here's Paul again. And I know that such a man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, God knows. That again, that I do not know again. Sounds familiar? I don't know what it is, but it's going to be great. Well, isn't that special? Mockery. Paul is mocking the super apostles' attempts to claim authority through visions. Yes, ancient mockery. Satire, farce, and insult poetry in public performance are even referred to as old comedy when talking about Greek comedy. In the 4th century BCE, satire in Athens really hit its stride with Aristophanes mocking Socrates, war, and even gender roles, and the economy. In 1st century Rome, the poet Catullus was especially fond of mockery and insult, especially of literary or social pretenders. Mockery was everywhere. But Paul? Well, Stephen Halliwell, in his exhaustive survey of Greek laughter, writes that Paul seemed to have little use for laughter. And yet the mockery here is not for laughter, it is to make a point. So yes, Paul is utilizing mockery here to make his point and to create distance from the super apostles. And after this bit of mockery, Paul continues to put down the super apostles by making himself weak and foolish. After begging God 3 times to remove his weakness, he is told that God's grace is enough. And in the end, his power comes from God and from his weakness and foolishness on behalf of God, not from anything he does. Paul has made a complete parody of the super apostles' attempts to raise themselves through boasting and instead elevated God through Paul's weakness.